Welcome to the Winner's Playbook. Every winner needs a game plan, and this one's for you.
All right, welcome back to the Winner's Playbook. It's not the most upbeat topic, but it's one that matters. We're going to be discussing today. I'm Josh, here with Billy as always, and today we're going to be talking about what actually happens to your money when you die. We're talking wills, super, life insurance, all things estate planning, and it's not just for the wealthy, it's for anyone that wants to make sure that their family is looked after. Billy, you and I are going to be demystifying this stuff, but before we get into it, do you want to tell me a bit about what's happening on your end, mate? What's the latest and what's news?
Yes, mate. Well, the latest latest tribulations with parenting. My son came home. He's in grade 1, and he's come home with a new iPhone. I'm like, what? He's like, oh look, I bought an iPhone for $150. I'm like, well, firstly, you don't have $150. like, firstly, you don't have $150. He might have $14 in his piggy bank or something. Anyway, so we've opened the case, and it's this smashed, destroyed in a brand new iPhone. The box it comes in, the nice box, and you open it up, the phone's totaled. It's all cracked and it's covered in grime and everything.
Oh, God.
And some other kid, I don't know, he's grifted him, or I don't know if his parents put him up to it or what. And we're like, how are you going to pay for this? And he'd done some deal like, oh, well, it's my birthday in September, so I'll get some money from that. And then I'm going to sell some Beyblade. I'm going to sell that. And like, he'd somehow done this trade. And we're like, Jesus Christ, like, how do we even respond to that?
Jeez. So it doesn't work? Does the phone work or not?
No, it's cooked. No, it's obviously, I think it's, I don't know. I think it's some dodgy parents there who might be, trying to get their kids to flog stuff.
And that's happening in grade 1. That's grade 1.
I know. This feels way too early for this stuff to be going on, but yeah.
Yeah, God. How did he feel about the phone not working? Is he upset, or does he know what's going on?
Oh, I'm trying to figure out how to talk. I haven't spoken to him about it because I was at work, but I saw this phone. And that's been sent back to school today, but I'm trying to figure out how to broach this with him. We've been telling him already, like, you're not getting a phone for some years to come. And he's grizzling about that because he's claiming other kids have phones and all that sort of stuff. But
yeah, really, that's a tough one, isn't it? Like with kids, and do they have them like with iPads and things at school yet, or are they not? They're not doing that.
I think like might be grade 3 or something like that where they start using tablets more. But the iPhone, we didn't think that was, especially when he presented this new box from his school bag.
What could it be? It could be anything. Wow. Well, I don't have a story that tops that one in terms of what's going on my side of things. It's been a very busy time as of late, and we're obviously both off to Singapore at the later end of next week. We're going to be going over to Singapore for a week for our leadership conference, which will be really cool. Haven't been there before, so that's going to be good. And there's lots of things going on around the house with the family. Set up a little greenhouse last week, which was fun, growing a few little pumpkins in there, and got some spring onions in there as well. So I was just going out to have a look at it before. It's looking nice. It's nice and humid in the little greenhouse. And of course, end of financial year is just about over. So I know it's been madness for everyone, particularly on the operations side of things in the business, trying to get everything done before the end of the financial year. And then, next week, actually doing a presentation at a school down near where I live for our Beyond School program. I'm going to be presenting to about 170 students talking all things money and how to prepare for sort of life after high school. So that should be really exciting. And then, jetting off to Singapore thereafter. So, lots happening, and that's half the year down. So another half to go, and it's going to be full of action. I can only imagine.
That's it. Well, I might hit up our primary schools having to do a presentation to the grade 1s to make sure they don't sort of try and do these dodgy deals and get ripped off and so on.
Well, we need to find out who that kid is. We need to find out who's the supplier amongst all of this. Who's doing those deals? I'll tell you what. But anyway, that's fun and games. But talking about the topics, obviously, we're going to be talking about today is estate planning, and this is not necessarily an area clients necessarily approach us about. It's not normally front of mind as to why they seek out a financial advisor, but as a financial advisor that we both are, we do have to obviously talk about a lot of other things, not necessarily just around money and investing. And sometimes it's the less exciting stuff, which is around, well, what would happen if you were to pass away, and where do your assets go? Who do you want to leave them to? And if we start there to begin, Billy, do we just want to unpack, like, Not, I see so many people that don't have wills in place, and it's astonishing the amount of people I see that don't have a will in place and never get it done until after we hassle them for quite some time. They eventually tend to get it done. But if you don't have a will in place and you were to pass away, do you want to just high level talk to us a bit about what does that process look like?
Yeah, so there's laws around this. Like if you die and you don't have a will, what happens to all your money? The laws are state-based, so it depends what state you reside in as to what would happen. But typically what is common across the board is you pass away, it's then up to your next of kin to deal with it, to administer the estate. So if you've got a partner, that's going to be your partner. If you don't have a partner, it'll be a child. If you don't have a child, it'll be a parent. So it goes through to next of kin. They administer the estate. And then in terms of who gets the money, again, it differs by state. But generally speaking, if you currently have a de facto partner or husband or wife, they're gonna get everything. Where it gets trickier is if you don't have a partner, or if you have kids from a previous relationship, then there's like this formula where like your current partner gets X amount and then kids from previous relationship get a component. So it can get complicated essentially if you don't have a will.
Yeah, and because what do they call that term? That's dying intestate when you don't have when you don't have a will.
Yeah.
And I do recall when I was going through the process of looking at my wills and getting that done many years ago now. I think I was looking at it for the Victorian guidelines, obviously being down here in Victoria. And I think it goes down the line of, your spouse, then kids, and then it keeps sort of going down the bloodline. And, you kind of hear stories of, I got this inheritance from my cousin, that I'd never speak to in another country. Like, we've all heard stories like that. But I think that if you get down the line and there's actually no one there for it, I'm quite certain it ends up with the Crown or it goes to the government, does it not? Is that your understanding, Billy?
Yeah, that's my understanding. I've never heard of that happening. I mean, I guess for most people, there is going to be some relative.
There's got to be
somewhere.
Someone.
Yeah. Maybe if you're new to Australia or something and you come over, come from another country, maybe that's different. But I've never heard of that actually happening. But yeah, I believe it ends up, with the state.
Well, if that's not a motivation to get your will done, I don't know what could possibly be. If that's where it could possibly end up, highly unlikely, because hopefully everyone's got a bit of family that it could go to. But if you're going to run the risk of that possibly occurring, that's not necessarily a good scenario in my view. But what about if we talk about estate planning and who's it for? Is it important if you're young? If you've got a family, if you've got kids, if you're close to retirement? What do you say there, Billy, to people around getting a will done and getting their estate plan tidied up? Like, is that something that you would speak to someone in their 20s about compared to someone like yourself, got a family and things like that? How do you approach that?
Yeah, well, I've seen, like, if you Google it, there'll be all these hardline stances about everyone needs a will, it's important, it doesn't matter if you have nothing. That's all good and well, but I think you and I know from experience, if you speak to a 24-year-old with no partner, no kids, and you say you need a will and they've got no money, they're not going to go and do the will. They're just not. They're just not going to do it. So it depends on your situation, how critical it is. But I think for most people, certainly once you have kids, it's not about just you anymore. It's about your children and your partner. So then it becomes quite critical. And then the next level, where we do see people motivated for this, is if they go through relationship breakdown, if they have to handle the estate of a parent and they see how complicated and unpleasant it is, people suddenly can become very motivated. But I would say as soon as you have other people involved who you care about, then it's really important.
Yeah, I think simple as that. I don't, I 100% agree. And like you said, the average 20-year-old probably doesn't have a great deal to leave behind. And if you were ever really worried, because, getting a proper will done through a lawyer obviously costs a little bit of money. And I don't know, what would you say would be the average cost for a will, Billy? Like if you were just to pick a figure, obviously it varies upon complexity, but what would you say is the average cost?
Yeah, there's a huge range, but if you're doing it properly with a lawyer, I think you're looking at least $800 to $1,000.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then a couple, maybe double that.
Yeah.
And so it's not cheap. Yeah.
No, it's not. And, then that probably is a bit of a barrier for some people in terms of wanting to get one done. And I suppose if we talk about like, okay, if you didn't get it done through a lawyer, which is the thing that we would always suggest you do, well, what other options do you have at your disposal? Well, there is obviously a lot of DIY kits will kits that you can get online. I think you can still get them from the post office, those will kits, and they don't cost a great deal of money, $50 or $100. Now, is that better than having the nothing? I would say, yeah, for sure. It's better than having the nothing, but you're obviously running the risk that it hasn't been completed correctly. It hasn't been checked off by a lawyer. And then in the event of something actually occurring, maybe it's not actually upheld to the standard or to your wishes of what you've actually left in there. So look, I'd say if you didn't actually have a will done and you were quite worried and didn't feel like you could pay a lawyer, you could always consider at least having one of those done. And I've even heard people say that you could also even write your own will on a piece of paper. And if you follow the right process, it's still better than nothing. So that's just, I suppose, food for thought. But what about talking about super and where that fits into estate planning? Because I suppose a lot of people don't really understand that superannuation is a non-estate asset unless it's nominated to go to the estate, which not a lot of people actually understand. So do you want to unpack that a bit, Billy, around super and how that works and fits into estate planning?
Yeah, I think like super is a lot more critical than most people realize when it comes to estate planning. Because if you take an example of a young family, right, say they've seen a good financial advisor, so hence now they have proper insurances in place. If they've got, as a couple, 2 super funds and they've got life insurance in the super fund, that could be a substantial amount of money. Like once life insurance pays out between a couple, you could be talking a couple of $1 million. That money is not typically dealt with by what's in your will. It's based on the beneficiary nominations you have on your super fund. So critical to get that right. So even if you don't have a will, at the very least, get the beneficiary nomination done on your super fund, because at least it means that pool of money plus life insurance will be dealt with properly. And to tie that off, when you do that beneficiary nomination, most people nominate an individual, right? Like their partner or their kids or a combination of those things. You can also nominate legal personal representative. And what that means is if you die, the super and any life insurance will then be dealt with as per your will with the rest of your assets.
And a lot of people, I don't think, realize as well that because super's not an estate asset unless you said, like you said at the end, you nominate your legal personal representative, and that's where it becomes and falls part of the estate. But some people think that might be a good idea. Like, okay, I'll just have it all get taken up and tidied up through my will. But sometimes the estate can actually be quite slow to unwind or be dispersed. Whereas if you have still your estate and your will documented, but you've got your superannuation separate and you don't have that paid to your estate, the super funds and insurance companies might pay out a lot quicker than it would if it went to the estate. So that's always something to consider between that. And I guess talking to why people generally would nominate their estate, that's just because they generally wouldn't have a valid beneficiary nomination through superannuation, because there are only certain people that you can nominate as a beneficiary through your super fund, which is, I think, something worthy of talking about, because when it goes to your estate, you can leave that money to whoever you want. You could leave it to a charity. You can virtually leave your money to whoever you want through your will. Whereas through superannuation, based on how the SIS rules or the superannuation rules work, you can only leave your money to specified people. And that's going down the line from, say, your spouse, a child of any age, someone who of what's called an interdependency relationship, or they're an interdependent. And that usually means you are financially dependent upon one another. You provide some sort of care, or you live together, and that can satisfy the interdependency rules. So a lot of people are surprised to actually learn a brother and sister, even though they're a really close from, I suppose, a blood perspective or from family perspective, you can't actually nominate them as your beneficiary unless you actually live together and you satisfied the interdependency rules. So a sibling is not a valid beneficiary nomination through super, which a lot of people are very surprised to know about, because spouse is fine, child of any age is, but your brother or sister, that's not a valid nomination unless they meet those interdependency rules. But if they didn't and you still wanted to leave your money to your brother or sister, the way you would be able to do it if they don't meet those rules is that's where you have to nominate your estate or your legal personal representative and have your super or life insurance get paid out through to your estate. And then, as we said earlier, you can leave your money to anyone through your estate. But what about even talking about the tax there, Billy? It wasn't a part that we're going to necessarily jump into, but the tax is very relevant on on superannuation. Do you want to unpack a bit of that? Because there's obviously strategies that we use as advisors to help mitigate that, depending upon the age of someone. But yeah, the tax on that stuff for super, like, is there a death tax in Australia? That's the thing that we always hear about. How does that work? And can you unpack that a bit?
Yeah, this is not widely understood really, because there's been like sort of political scare campaigns about inheritance taxes and things like that in the past. And we don't have an inheritance tax in Australia, but we're in Australia, everything gets taxed. So there's certainly things you need to know. And the main one is there is a death tax on super. So it is an inheritance tax. But the way it's applied is quite specific. So if you die and you've got a partner and your super gets paid out to your partner, there's no tax. If you die and the super gets paid out to young kids, there's no tax. If it gets paid out to another adult, there can be tax, and it can be as high as 17% of your balance. And if you've got life insurance as well, it can be 17% of that. So if it's like $1 million payout, we're talking a $170,000 tax bill. So what do you do about it? There's not a whole lot you can do until you're over 60, which is when you get some access to super. But once you hit over 60, that's when there are some strategies to reduce, or in some cases get that potential tax down to nothing. So just something to be aware of course.
It's always a shock and surprise to people. And if we dug down deeper into that, like if you look at your super fund, it's actually made up of a taxable and then a tax-free component. But most people's funds we see are generally always going to be more taxable, because that's where all the employee contributions, salary sacrifice have come from, which is normally the majority of money people have in their super is from their employer. That money is falling part of that taxable component, which, like you said, that goes and can get taxed at 17%, depending upon who that goes to. But then there's that tax-free component that you might have in there, which is from money you've contributed on an after-tax basis. That actually does not get taxed, no matter who that goes out to. So always worthy of noting that. But as you said, Billy, if you are after age 60, there are some sort of nice strategies that we can look at deploying to mitigate that tax. And it's worthy of noting that you as the individual, you don't pay the tax because you've passed away. It's the people that are going to receive your money obviously just get less of it because it's going to be taxed upon receipt.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny because with clients, if they're over 60 and that's a potential strategy, I know that everyone has different feelings about it. So I explain how it works like we just did then. And then I say, look, you won't be here. So do you care about this? Because some people say, I couldn't give a shit. My kids have got plenty of money, whatever. I don't want to even think about it. Whereas other people say, there is no way I want any of this money going to the tax office. I'd rather my kids have it. So what can we do? So you get like different views on whether that matters or not. But certainly something we have to raise, and we've heard lots of stories about people receiving a death benefit and being shocked that this huge chunk is being ripped out and going off to the tax office.
Yeah, well, if we talk about how do we shore up that the beneficiary nominations are actually done correctly, because then again we're sort of sticking with super here for the time being, but this is also relevant to life insurance death benefit nominations as well, because there's something called a binding and then a non-binding nomination, which again a lot of people don't really know, and most people generally would have a non-binding nomination if they haven't, or if they even have a nomination in the first place, because the amount of people I see that have never looked at their super fund and therefore they haven't even nominated anyone to receive their money is mind-blowing. But then even when they've done that, a lot of superannuation funds, particularly the industry funds, you have to renew it every 3 years, and then it converts to non-binding. Do you want to unpack that a bit, Billy, and how that works? And some funds actually have non-lapsing nominations.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff's getting pretty outdated, I reckon. But we're stuck with this system where it's like there's a binding nomination means the super fund is bound to pay the money out to who you've nominated. They have to do it, as long as it's a valid beneficiary, like a child or a partner. As we spoke about before, you can't have brother, sister, mum, dad, friend, anyone else. Has to be one of those people. If you've nominated one or more of those people, the super fund must pay the money to those people. Mm-hmm. That's a binding nomination. You've got a non-binding one where it's like they're not legally bound to follow your instructions. How that plays out in practice, who knows? Mm-hmm. But it obviously gives you less certainty. And then a lot of binding nominations are lapsing, which means after 3 years, you don't have a nomination anymore, so you need to do a new one. Whereas the non-lapsing ones, you make the nomination with your super fund, it stays in place until you change it.
Nothing in life's ever
Have
simple.
I missed anything? Have I missed anything?
No, it's just these are things that, you know, people just never really consider, like little things like that. And that's where, you know, some funds do offer that non-lapsing nomination, which is, you know, it's quite valuable in my opinion. Never have to worry or think about it again. But
yeah, so the best thing you can do is, okay, who's valid? Make sure it picks the right people.
Correct.
Get a binding non-lapsing nomination, and then that's it. You don't have to do anything unless you have more kids or get a new partner or something like that.
Yeah. No, exactly. And what? Yeah. You go, Billy.
Yeah, sorry. The last thing is, like, there's some discretion with it, depending on the super fund, right? Because if you nominate someone, for example, let's say young and single, and you nominate your parents, which is invalid. But if something happens to you, the money's probably going to end up with your parents. So it's like the super fund still has to decide where they're going to pay those benefits. So, you know, if you nominate someone, it's likely it'll end up with that person, but there's no certainty unless you check those rules and make sure you've done it correctly.
And I suppose that kind of relates back to the example I said about doing the will. So if you do it through a lawyer and it gets done right, you got much more likelihood of your money going where it should. Whereas if you did a DIY kit, you know, it probably will end up where you want it to go, but there's no guarantees of that. And then it's just up to you in terms of deciding and understanding the trade-offs there if you want to risk your money not ultimately going to where you want, which maybe when you're younger is probably something you don't really care too much about. But
you won't be here anymore.
No, exactly right. So you don't
have kids and all that sort of stuff. Maybe you don't really care, but you can leave behind a mess for whoever's got to deal with it.
Well, that's the part.
Probably one more thing. Sorry, Josh. One more thing on this. Like some aspects of the law are black and white, and other aspects have like an element of fairness. And that this is relevant here because with binding nominations, it's black and white. So if you've got 3 kids and you only nominate one child to get all your super, the super fund's going to pay to that one child. But if in your will, if you say only one child's getting all my money, the other kids can contest that, and they've got a valid argument. Well, hang on, what about us? So the super fund is less about fairness. It's more about this is the law. Whereas wills can be contested and end up in court and all that sort of stuff. And there's an element of, okay, what's reasonable and what's fair.
Yeah, so
I think that's important to know.
Yeah, well, I've spoken to families about that, and you know, the mum and dad are like, "Oh no, the 3 kids, they'll just work it out when we're gone. It's all going to be nice and friendly." It's like, come on, like when there's millions up for grabs, you know, in the end, you know, people can sometimes just be out for themselves, and that can be family. Doesn't really matter. And I've always just said, look, just get the will done, take it out so that it doesn't cause any friction, even though it can still cause friction. But just if you want it to be divided 3 ways, just make it simple and specified in your will so it's nice and easy. So no one can say, here's this and that, or no, this was what it was supposed to be. I don't get it when people tell that to me, but I still see that sometimes as a way of thinking of, no, they'll figure it out themselves. Like, no, they won't. They might, but it could cause and leave, you know, it could sort of pull apart the family, I suppose, in some way. But what if we talk about some mistakes we see people doing when they're planning for this themselves? I suppose that's kind of one of them, and that's really not planning and just saying, no, it'll be right. The kids will look after it. One I sometimes see, I do a lot of work for with business owners, and not having consideration maybe if a testamentary trust is relevant. I'm finding a lot for business owners with kids, and you know, they've got a fair bit of wealth behind them. And a part of that, I always ask them, and I just got off a call before with a young family doing really well in their business and wanting to build some real wealth for the future. And I said, okay, well, you've got 3 kids. How do you feel about knowing that if you were to pass away, the money all goes to your kids, but then, you know, if they have their own relationships in future, which, you know, I'm sure they probably will, there's a chance that then their spouse, if there was a future marriage breakdown, the spouse could get hold of some of your wealth that you guys have created. Is that something that, you know, you'd want to try and protect against? You know, usually would be the case. So that's where conversations can maybe be had around having something like a testamentary trust provision through a will, which means, you know, upon your passing, there's no trust in existence whilst you're living, but then upon your passing, your assets, you can specify what it is exactly, goes up into that trust structure, and then can be managed on behalf of your children. and can help sort of keep wealth in the family. Now it's a complex topic in terms of how that actually works and the taxes and how that really plays out in reality. But that's always a conversation I make known to clients, because I think a lot of people just think of a will and just, all right, this is where I'm leaving my money, but don't necessarily put consideration to keeping the wealth within the family and how that looks down the line and preventing or protecting against future marriage breakdown for the kids. That's probably not something that parents generally would ever think about. Like, I don't know, Billy, have you ever thought about your kids getting married down the line and, you know, thinking about their future marriage breakdown? It's like, hell no, it's a long time away. So, you know, most people, well, I suppose that's wrong. Billy, you might have thought about that because you're an advisor.
Well, we've seen it with clients. Yeah, we've seen it with clients. Like, let's say you're, you know, a couple in their 70s or something, and one of their adult kids gets a new partner. They really don't like the new partner. They think there's, you know, with the benefit of some age and wisdom, they're looking at it thinking, I don't think this is going to last. Mm-hmm. Yeah, what if someone passes away, a couple of $1 million ends up with that child, partner gets a hold of it, then they split up, and now, yeah, half the family's wealth has gone off with this other person. So, yeah, it's a consideration. That's where you can use something like a testamentary trust, where the money lands in a trust and then it's distributed from there. And people often use that for grandkids too, because, like, in that situation, they want to make sure their grandkids get benefit. They don't want it all necessarily going to their own kids. They want to make sure the grandkids get some direct benefit as well.
Well, even business owners actually is one I mean, kids as business owners, and I had some conversations of late with some clients of mine, and made mention of that, of just, if you're leaving your wealth to them, you also got to remember, if you're leaving your wealth and your kids in business, like, asset protection for the child is actually a relevant conversation. And that was, again, well, okay, do we want to leave it to them, or should you maybe consider leaving it to them through some sort of a structure? Because if it just ends up in their own personal name and it's a property, maybe they wouldn't want that actually in their own name, because then that's susceptible or accessible from an asset protection point of view. So I guess that's getting into a bit more of the complex side of things. Is there any other common mistakes, Billy, that you've seen from an estate planning point of view?
Yeah, I'll do two other quick ones. One is, if you're sort of obligated to include beneficiaries sometimes, like include children. Like, if you have 3 kids, you can't necessarily say, I want those 2 kids to get all my money and the other child to get nothing. You might be able to do that, but it's not simple. Like, you have to justify in your will why you're excluding a child or a partner or something like that. So you need to factor everyone in who might be, have some sort of right to be a beneficiary, I guess. That's one thing. And the other one is, we don't want to go down this rabbit hole in this podcast, but there's life insurance as well. So, okay, if something happens to me, am I adequately providing for the people I care about? You might need to take out some life insurance to, like, cover the gap, to make sure there's enough money there.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. And that's definitely something worthy of unpacking on another podcast, because life insurance inside and outside super can both be treated, a little bit differently from a taxation point of view, and even who you can leave that money to. Because maybe a bonus tip, if you have a life insurance policy outside super, you can actually nominate anyone to receive that money. It's not subject to the SIS or superannuation rules. So we'll throw that in as a little bonus tip before we close out in a moment. Okay. But have you got any other sort of final words of wisdom there, Billy, or one simple step people should be taking to get started? Any parting words, mate?
To get started, well, if you've got a partner, have a chat to your partner, right? Do we need to address this? That's the first one. And then if you're not sure, you speak to a financial advisor who's a good person. Because if you go straight to a lawyer, their job is to sell you some legal advice. They're going to draw up a will. But if you have a chat to your advisor first, they can tell you, okay, what are your estate planning needs? Do I need to speak to a lawyer? So I'd say advise partner, certainly family members, and then if you're unsure, a good advisor be able to point you in the right direction.
I think it's great way to finish, mate. Well, I'm going to close out here, guys. And of course, what we're speaking about is, I suppose, it's a little bit of a morbid topic, but it's not about being morbid. It's more about being prepared, and sorting this stuff out now can save your family a lot of stress later. Because, like, as we said, it's not necessarily about you being here. It's more of what happens upon your legacy and when you're not here and not leaving a mess for your family to have to clean up. And trying to keep the family together is always a good thing, I would say, as well. But yeah, if this episode, of course, helped make things clearer, hit the follow, leave a review, and send it to someone who needs to sort out their will or their estate planning. And as Billy said, if you do want to chat with a financial advisor, just feel free to jump on our website. I think we're updating our photos as well, Billy, so the faces might look a bit more fresh on there. I know mine is finally going to have my updated haircut because my photo on there had a bit of hair on it. So now it's got my new hairdo, which is a lack of hair, I will say. And
that's it. You're a dad now, so you go, dad now. So looking a bit older, a bit
got to embrace
wiser.
it.
So
yeah, got to embrace it. Maybe wiser. Well, that's questionable. But until next time, Billy, I'll see you on the Winners Playbook.
Cheers.
Disclaimer. The information contained in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into account your personal situation. Please head to the show notes if you wish to book a free 15-minute call to discuss your personal situation.